I want us to become brothers again like we used to be, and for us to find ourselves and bond with each other. Can we agree to that?
Opinions vary.
Welcome to Three Brothers Filmcast, a monthly roundtable podcast where the brothers behind threebrothersfilm.com have substantial, nuanced conversations about film. I'm Anton Bergstrom, and I'm here with my brothers.
Anders.
And Aren.
My last name is the same as my brother's.
And this month we're talking about Ryusuke Hamaguchi's Drive My Car, the latest East Asian Arthouse success to be nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards. But first, thanks so much for listening to our podcast. If you want to help grow the show, 5-star ratings, social media shares, and reviews of the show really do a lot to expand our reach and bring new listeners to the podcast. As well, if you've enjoyed our conversations here and are writing at threebrothersfilm.com, please consider supporting us on Patreon. But now, on to the show.
Okay, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
妻です。僕たちは確かに僕が一番恐れていたのは音を失うことだった。
Drive My Car might seem like an unsuspecting charmer for North American audiences. After all, it's a slow and quiet 3-hour-long drama conducted in multiple foreign languages, including Japanese and Korean Sign Language. In the film, theater director and sometimes actor Ryusuke Kafuku, played by Hidetoshi Nishijima, rebuilds his personal and creative lives after his wife's unexpected death through his new production of Anton Chekhov's 1898 play, Uncle Vanya. Drive My Car spends ample time studying Kafuku's methodical creative processes, such as his tendency to listen to his wife's recordings of the play's dialogue while driving his small red Saab 900 Turbo, which he uses to prepare his lines, or his approach to directing, which involves lengthy sessions with the actors reading and rereading the text of the play. Perhaps most notably, and here we'll repeat a frequent observation about the film, director Ryusuke Hamaguchi takes over half an hour to get to the opening credits. But that choice to delay the opening credits to such a significant extent exemplifies how the film's careful patience can win over an open and patient viewer and offer plenty of artistic rewards. Drive My Car takes care to document the habits of life and how they shape the personal and relational growth. In the film, Kafuku becomes resident director at a theater festival in Hiroshima, but the festival managers require that for insurance reasons he has to use their chauffeur to drive him. Now, this isn't a car movie by any measure, especially if you're thinking about the Fast and the Furious series, but this is a movie that loves to show how driving offers a space for thought and internal development. And the film's interest in showing that space in life is key to its effect in my view. The film is based on a short story by internationally famous author Haruki Murakami from his 2014 collection Men Without Women, which I'll note I haven't read. However, I was more struck by the film's affection for the theatrical process and the character dynamics of modernist drama, using Uncle Vanya specifically, but I'd also note the film's resemblance to, say, the plays of Henrik Ibsen. Drive My Car tells its story about a handful of characters in intertwined relationships, a slowly uncovering of hidden dimensions in the characters. Much of the film's success is in how, once aspects are revealed, we see that they were always there. Some characters find a kind of redemption or healing. Others seemed fated by their character to ruin, as in so many plays of the late 19th and early 20th century. So, gentlemen, I'd like to explore the film's interest in driving and modernist drama, the presence of Murakami, the significance of Hiroshima, and the film's narrative structure, and anything else you want to bring in. But why don't we start, as we tend to, with your first impressions? Anders, have you seen any films by Ryusuke Hamaguchi before? How did you Drive My Car strike you while you were watching it and then also sort of in the period afterwards?
So, I had never seen any of Hamaguchi's films before. I was aware of him as a director from the films he's had at the Cannes Film Festival in the last 5 years or so. But I had heard good things about the film. I think, Aren, you'd seen it before me. But watching it as it unfolded, I was really into it. I was surprised how much it struck me, and it was really caught up in the story that it was telling. The hook for me is the Murakami aspect. Murakami is probably one of my favorite writers of the last like contemporary writers, I guess you'd say. Although I haven't actually read the short story collection it's based on.
Okay.
But I would argue that the film, in some of its thematic treatment of like the concept of like knowing other people and the way that things reveal themselves, and as well as its sort of interest in relationships and things like that, are very Murakami. Although this particular story lacks some of the sort of more surreal or magical aspects of some of Murakami's more popular works.
But you definitely...
But I could see it as an adaptation. And
Yeah.
apparently it's not a straight adaptation.
Okay.
It takes and combines aspects of a number of the stories in that collection.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
even though the overall plot of the car and the play and stuff is from the Drive My Car short story, some of the other details are filled in from the other stories. The other thing I'll note is I watched it with my wife, and she wasn't sure she was going to be able to stay awake for a 3-hour
Yeah.
Japanese language film. Although, like me, she enjoys foreign films, especially East Asian cinema. She was caught right up in it. And like from the beginning, from the sort of intriguing beginning where you're trying to figure out who these characters are and what the relationships are. And
I want to come back to the beginning later.
and then when the credits hit at 40, I think it's like 43 minutes in, she was like, "What? That's just the opening?" I'm like, I just started laughing and said, "Yep." And that opening to me alone almost plays like a Murakami short story. And then you get into the deeper novelistic element of the plot that draws on that prior 40 minutes as prologue, as the necessary background for us to really understand these characters in a deeper way. So,
So let's hold on to the narratives now. Let's hold on to the narrative. Let's get Aren's impression. Then I want to come back to that, how the opening works in terms of narration.
Yeah, so I saw it in theaters. I saw it a while back. I'd heard the raves about it. I'd heard a lot of people talk about it as their best film of the year. So I saw it after the top 10 lists came out, and it kind of positioned itself as the international feature of 2021. Mm-hmm. And so I have kind of an instinctual reaction against some of these movies sometimes, where like I don't want to be caught up drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm always a little bit skeptical about groupthink. If everybody's saying the same thing, I'm a little bit hesitant. But the actual process of watching the film, it won me over really quickly through its patience, through the fact that it kind of positions this very human drama, very mundane drama in some aspects. Like there's nothing really exceptional about these people's lives.
Yep.
But it positions the mystery of human relationships and simply the act of living as worthy of attention and investigation and a 3-hour runtime. People have been terming this movie as epic, right? Just because of the length, and people always use epic as kind of a synonym for long.
Really? I can't believe that. Wow.
yeah.
And I'm like, this is an extremely intimate movie.
Yes.
But I understand the impulse purely on the sense that it's not like there's any lack in drama here, despite the modest ambitions of the actual dramatics. Mm-hmm. And so it's a film that fills out its 3-hour runtime very easily through its patient observations, its repetitions, and things we'll get into in a bit, which is how, as a film, it reflects the theatrical experience.
Yeah.
But we can get to that in a little bit. But I think it's interesting focusing so much on those first 45 minutes because they do work as a prologue, as you said, Anders, and they do set up the relationship between Ryusuke and Oto, because you have her voice on the recordings when he's driving the Saab, because she obviously has the relationship with Koji, and you have the fact that she's the enigmatic character who looms over all of this, and she's like the mystery that the characters are constantly trying to solve, as if she will somehow unlock things, right? That first 40-some minutes is so essential, and it's so satisfying in and of itself, but because it is allowed to inform all these other dynamics between these characters, it breathes so much life into like, wow, what a rich and full film this is.
Odo is the most like key like Murakami character, that enigmatic woman that you can never fully know, and yet who like sort of dominates your life in some way is like such a key aspect. She
haunts him.
Yeah, that's a very, very Murakami.
She functions like a ghost through those recordings.
Yeah, the recordings.
For Ryusuke and for Koji, and then also for Masaki, from hearing it and trying to understand what this relationship is between Ryusuke and her. Like, what does she mean?
The chauffeur, for people listening, if you haven't seen it, so the chauffeur driving, him around, listening to the recordings of his wife, then also becomes somewhat, connected to the people.
She becomes invested in that relationship that she's hearing in past tense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Anton, what are your thoughts, Anton? Like, what was your obviously you had the keynote here, so you've given us a breakdown of themes, but what was your just reaction in terms of like satisfaction as a movie?
So I was very pleased with it. I'd say I'm not sure how you guys viewed it. I actually watched it in 2 parts, just because it was a busy week, and I sort of watched the first hour and 40 minutes, and then it was like, an hour and 20 to finish it off. It didn't lose its effect. Like, I really liked this film a lot. And it was, I used the word unsuspecting because it was the sort of thing where you guys both said you really liked it. But it's a patient film. It's slow. It takes its time. But at the same time, I find it very engaging. Like, I probably got more into these characters, their relationships, and just following them and figuring them out than I have in almost any other movie this year on a pure sort of just character level. Because again, like, I've talked about how much I like the card counter as a character study, but there's nothing exceptional, right? The character in the main character in the card counter, Oscar Isaac's character, is so bizarre and strange in some ways, whereas this is a movie about just, in many ways, very normal people, but it's still transfixing in some ways.
But that movie is also solitary. This is about community in so many ways. Relationships,
community in the theater sense.
Yeah, exactly.
The community building that putting on a theatrical production builds. I think the other thing I would point out, just back to this comment about Odo and her recordings, it also does remind me again of this sort of Ibsen, where you sometimes, although if it was an Ibsen play, you would never meet Odo in like an initial scene, but it would just be this character that everyone talks about that hovers over the entire events of the movie. What do you guys think about this opening structure then? So the pre-credits, which I think you're more accurate, Anders. I think I said half an hour, but I think you're right. It's more towards 40 minutes, actually. And I think you're right that in some sense, it's its own story, but it also is necessary to understand the rest of the film.
That's a good way of putting it. If you were to just watch a 40-minute short film of it, it would stand on its own as a sort of interesting, short story. But in the context of the film as the prologue, you're right, it informs so much of what comes later, and I think it deepens it. So what I was going to say is, like, I know we've railed about long movies. It's our ongoing Twitter theme and campaign that we need more short movies for tired parents and working people who can't stay up till 1 a.m. every night. But if this film earns its like,
yes,
in
it's
the
very
sense
much
that
earned.
I would agree with you also that my interest never flagged. I didn't find myself checking my phone. I didn't find myself getting up to go, get another drink or use the washroom. It kept me really like transfixed, and I was shocked when I was like, I hadn't originally planned, I think, to watch it all in one night, but I hit the 1 2-hour mark, and I was like, I'll go with this because I'm not tired and I want to know what happens next. I also think that I liked how it's about real people, but I would say that, like, well, the things that happen to them nothing is out of the ordinary. It also returns a little bit of the, like, I think sometimes movies these days think that for something to be compelling, it has to be world shattering, or it has to be a historical
inflated
film
stakes
about people who in reality did amazing things, or it has to be like fantasy, essentially, science fiction, those kind of things, right? But the reality is that that betrays, I think, a lack of curiosity at the human condition. That this film, much like, say, a Chekhov play or some of the classics of, like, that the literature of that era, they do is, like, they trust that human beings are interested in themselves, and they remind us that sometimes really, like, jarring and strange things happen in our lives that are not, like, fantastical, but they shake us. They shake our whole world, and they shake, so some of the, we can maybe, I don't know if we want to get how deep into spoilers we want to get about this film.
Well, yeah, so what's an example in the film that
there's 2 examples I would think of. Well, the major one is the fact that Ryusuke discovers that his wife, Odo, who dies, of a brain hemorrhage had been carrying on a extramarital affair with another person.
So he sees that and confirms
he sees and confirms it visually himself, but she doesn't know because it's a whole mirror shot type thing, and he quietly slips out. So that, that dealing with that, and he never gets to confront her about it before she dies. Yeah. And he lives with that at the same time that her, as you said, her ghost, her presence is so important to his creative process and things like that. And him trying to work out like why she would do that, because it doesn't seem like there was any actual real problems or damage in the relationship, right? So this is the central mystery, I think, if you want to call it that. It's a very human one. The other one is like Koji accidentally fights the photographer and kills the guy. And so
Koji's
he's an actor,
the star actor
who's going to be cast in the play, and it turns out, maybe I'll save that revelation for anyone who wants to watch the movie. But one interesting thing is Koji is removed from the play so that Ryusuke can step in because he accidentally commits manslaughter, right? And that's a thing that could happen. You beat a guy up because he's taking pictures of you, and then find out that a couple days later, actually he died of his wounds. Oh crap! Now you're off to jail.
But that's even handled in a non-sensational way.
Like the police show up and like, hey,
and then it's also like, where were you that night? Like, so that's like what.
That's what you did after we left the bar.
As if you were like real people were.
No, so I thought it did a really great job of like showing the drama of real life and the fact that you don't need to have these like elevated stakes, so speaking, to actually have real deep emotional power. So when we say that it's modest, it doesn't mean that nothing happens. These things are things that these characters will remember for their entire life as like some of the significant moments of their life.
Yeah, but I guess like the only thing I would say is that it also shows that part of the reason that the problem with our reliance on like fantasy and sort of hyperbolic or exaggerated scenarios in a lot of Hollywood films is the fact that like it just betrays that a lot of filmmakers can't create dynamic or compelling characters who seem realistic and normal. And so like that to me is part of the success of the film. It's not that it's just sort of capturing how there's sort of something fascinating about everyday life, but it's actually created a very fascinating set of characters in a scenario. Because it's the kind of movie that I mentioned its attention to the mundane and the habitual and like these little things in life that do have a greater significance often. The way the film does that is very precise, and it really just brings out the significance of those aspects. I don't know. What do you think, Aren? Like, how do you view the beginning? What do you think about sort of the tone of the film, its effect?
So I don't want anybody to mistake us, or me specifically, as saying this movie is somehow naturalistic. It's not. It's actually programmatic in its structure, and then it's almost disarmingly earnest and upfront about its themes. Like, it just says that it's about exploring the unknowability of humans. It's about how art can reflect life, and how the doing of art and the consumption of art can reveal aspects of your own life while also enriching your actual engagement with the art itself. It has these things in conversations. It has these things in the actual structural setup. So this is not one of those Arthouse films which is about the things that happen in the margins. Things do happen on screen, right? And there's an actual dramatic conflict, and there's a pace, and there's a build. I think what's so disarming about the film is how quiet it is, because it kind of takes Yusuke's emotional tenor. He's not a character who ever really speaks his mind. He's almost like emotionally constipated to a point of pain. Obviously, he catches Odo with Koji. He can't confront Odo. He can't ask her what, having the affair actually means to her. And then she dies before he can do that. So he has to live with that lack of actually probing, really trying to understand something. And then this happens throughout the film, where the only time he seems to be able to allow a confrontation to actually occur is within the confines of the theater, where he has like a power dynamic over somebody else, and he can couch it through the art, right? He can use the art to explore. It's the whole reason he cast Koji. It's the whole reason that he refuses for so long to actually put himself into the role, because as he says in the film, doing the art, really actually engaging with the text is like a terrifying thing, because of how much it tells you about yourself.
Yeah. It's like a loss of control too.
Yes, exactly. You have to actually surrender yourself to art if you want it to reveal its secrets.
As he says, you have to surrender to the text of the play.
Yes.
He keeps repeating.
And so I think we should get into maybe in a couple minutes about its relationship to repetition and art and theatricality and things like that. But I just think in terms of the character and the tone and those aspects of the film, it's this weird mix where in some ways it's very classical, right?
Yeah, well, that's why I keep making this connection to, like, it just really struck me as having a feel of like modernist drama. Like Ibsen and stuff are like, they were thought to be like realistic when it sort of altered theater in the late 19th century. But when you read them, they're contrived in the sense of, not in a bad way, but like, right, the character arcs are structured so that by the end of the play, there's been a change or something's happened. And that's sort of what I see in this movie.
Yeah, and often the contrivance is the compression of either space or time.
Yeah.
From real life. Like, nothing, very little things happen in those, but like, let's say in A Doll's House, everything happens within like a few days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? But in Uncle, this is the one visit of, Uncle Vanya in the play, right? Like,
Yeah, in the Chekhov play that they're doing in this movie.
And part of the contrivance of art itself is that you're taking the things that, even if they're not unrealistic scenarios, as in this film, you're taking all the things that are the key drama, like hinge points for a character's emotional journey, and you're putting them in front of the camera, right? Like, you're allowing people to witness that. You're not having things left unsaid. You're actually showing it.
Yeah, they're also showing, this also connects back to the other point I wanted to make about what you were saying, Aren, that it really allows us to see, I think, like the internal workings of different characters. And it's like, because it's always the question of like, how do you visualize or represent in a film what's going on within someone? Well, one way they do that in this movie is that you give time for characters to either be alone or just quiet with another person, whether they're driving in the car and things like that. But it's not static. Like, there's something going on within the characters, and there's that muted. You're seeing kind of like muted character dynamics, but there's still like a dynamic going on. Because it's not like an in-your-face kind of drama where it's like people are screaming and crying and like, but it still seems like it's like emotional and deep. And the only other thing I'd say is also connecting this, what we see with the characters, to the structure of the play. What I also find, the structure of the movie. What I also find brilliant is that I said it uncovers things about the characters. But what's so great and why these characters seem so convincing is that when you discover new things about them, it doesn't seem actually surprising. It seems like it makes sense for that character.
Inevitable.
it feels like meeting a real person. And learning things about them. But I think it's interesting that you say that the film somehow makes manifest their inner life in certain ways, because we've also said, and I agree with Aren, that one of the themes of both this film and Murakami's work more broadly is the unknowability of some people, and that people will just do things that are strange and baffling and seem to come out of nowhere. And you may never get the answer, but sometimes you can discover something. But when you do, as you said, it kind of clicks, because ultimately we can't read each other's minds. We only learn about people through relationship, through communication, through doing things, through ritual, through conversation, and these kind of things. So I would agree with that.
Do you think with Koji that, like, my thoughts with Koji was that his actions and his sort of inability to like not repeat the same mistakes is both like, it doesn't make sense in the sense of you're like, why would someone do this? But that's also,
people do stuff like that.
People do stuff like that, and it actually makes sense in terms of like, there's certain people who seem to sort of approach life that way. They seem unable to break out of the sort of ruinous circle that they've set up for themselves.
So none of us have talked very much though about the whole title "Driving" and "Drive My Car" as a driving movie.
Did you know that, because we've been into the Beatles, did you know that he really wanted to have the Beatles song in the movie?
The other short stories in the Murakami collection are named after Beatles songs. So, and Haruki Murakami's most famous novel is Norwegian Wood. So
yeah, the name of the Murakami collection is a Hemingway short story collection name too.
Yes, you're right.
Like he's so reflexive.
Yeah.
Because I just was, when I was sort of reading some of the Wikipedia sort of production history, they were sort of saying how he wanted to have that song, But it's just sort of, securing rights to Beatles can often just be such a difficult process.
I will say that I actually liked the very like muted score of the film, and I've listened.
It was
It's
really
used
good score,
selectively,
actually.
right? But it's not all the time.
But I've listened to a few of the pieces.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Does the first 40-minute, the opening sequence, is it without music, and the score begins
In that credit sequence?
At the credit sequence, I think so, but I can't confirm.
I'd have to
That was
verify
that was my impression, but there might have been a low music that I just wasn't aware of. But my impression was that all the music begins after that 40 minutes.
So what do you guys think about the car thing, though?
The car is an interesting thing, and so it's a weird connection, but just let's go with it. It reminds me of True Detective, specifically True Detective Season 1, because True Detective Season 1, all the important character moments take place in the car. And what that show revealed is that cars are a fixed micro space, right? Like, people are forced to interact with each other. They share the space, and there is something else happening so that you have a passive investment in the actual conversation that's happening. So it's about patience. So it's actually it's almost like a theatrical space in the sense that you're sitting there and watching and waiting and talking and engaging, but there's no, it's not like prodding you to engage. It's simply waiting for you. And cars are strange because it's an intimate space, and it forces you to supply the actual happenings because there's something else already automatically happening on the under level.
But that dynamic you're describing is especially the case when someone is driving you around. I think, it's like when you're with a taxi driver, an Uber driver, or in this case it's the chauffeur, where it's like the situation, the dynamic of the car creates this opportunity for some sort of something to happen.
Sitting in a car can be awkward when you're being driven around, but if you surrender yourself to the moment, if you invest yourself in it, it can reveal interesting things about somebody else. So it mirrors the engagement to a text, which requires you to be vulnerable, to go somewhere you don't know where you're actually going emotionally, but it might be rewarding and reveal something about yourself in the reverse.
And I would say that the experience of getting to know another car passenger or the driver is similar. Think of the number of stories people have where it's like, oh, my taxi driver, this is their life story, where they came from, or these. It allows people to share moments of things. You sometimes discover stuff about people that you're that was surprisingly intimate or vulnerable, shocking. I ran away from a war-torn country, and here's my story. Or my ex-wife did this thing or whatever, right? Those kind of situations. And I would say that echoes an experience I had in my own life. Was that when I was in late high school and in first few years of university, my best friend at the time and I, whenever we want to have real conversations, we'd drive. Horrible, burn so much gas. But we drove around Saskatoon for hours, just aimlessly, not going anywhere in particular, but because we could be in the car. We didn't, and maybe it's a particularly also stereotypically masculine thing. You don't have to look the other person in the face. You're both looking out straight ahead. You can put some tunes on. We listen to so much music, and it opens the space. You don't jump into it right away. It's it is a space that allows you to bring things up and develop these conversations, as you said, where there's no real stakes or challenge, but you're both going somewhere together.
It's partly because you also have often if someone's driving you, say a taxi driver. You also know it's a set amount of time, kind of like when you enter into a movie theater and sit down with the movie, and you have a space here that you're going to be with this person. That you can have an experience or something if you choose to be open to it. But I think that also creates a chance for people might be more willing sometimes to share something, knowing that this passenger will get out and they might never see them again. I mean, it's a different dynamic in the movie in the sense that it's the chauffeur and
because Misaki,
the director get to know each other.
They become friends. Yeah.
They become friends,
but they never become super.
But not buddy friends.
No, exactly. They're not very intimate with each other.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Good point.
But
yes.
they are. But they share a great deal about each other, and
yes.
And the end of the film confirms the connection as well.
But that's rewarding. That the fact that there is not a larger requirement in that relationship.
It's just the car they share together.
But so if we can also go back to the car though, the other thing with the car is they're not just driving once. They're driving every day back and forth. So it's a repetition. So it's like his engagement with the text in the film. It's read the text again, read the text again. And the cast starts growing annoyed with it, right? Like, they're like, why do we just keep reading? And he's like, they start, they do some practices, do some rehearsals. Scenes aren't quite working out. He's like, okay, everybody sit down, get the tables together. We're going to open and read the text again. And
So to clarify, all the actors sort of feel like, we've done the read through of the play a few times now. Why aren't we moving on? And he keeps just holding on to that for, I think they only have 6 weeks to do the rehearsals
and
get
2 weeks of
ready.
performances.
Yeah. And so that's a fairly narrow window. And I've been in only sort of amateur plays when I was younger, but usually you're only doing the read throughs for, a few days, and then you're going to start walking around, blocking things out. But there is that, he's obsessed with, you have to have this experience and relationship with the text before we can start to create new experiences when they're acting outside, and there's that connection he wants to duplicate.
So I wanted to ask you both about the actual idea, staging, and concept behind the play that they're putting on, this adaptation of Uncle Vanya.
Have you guys read Uncle Vanya?
I have not.
I haven't either, no.
But I mean, simply the way that they're putting it on as this multilingual with subtitles, I thought that was really interesting, and it really also means that to some degree the actors in the play don't understand each other.
Yeah.
Which is really, really interesting to think
about.
Yeah,
a lot of them definitely don't, right? There's this definitely...
Or at least not when they're speaking in the play, because they all speak in their native
language. They only know because they've read the text, say, all in Japanese. If they do Japanese, they know what this person says it was supposed to mean.
Korean Sign Language.
So one of the characters does the Korean Sign Language.
I think it's interesting in the film, and it works with the film, and I think it works maybe more in the film because we're approaching it as English speakers, and so the film already has that distancing. I think if I sat down to a play and people were speaking other languages, it would be a distancing effect that I don't think it would quite work in the moment in the space. It's interesting
in an actual play?
But if I actually sat down in a theater and expected everybody to speak English, and then some people started speaking French, and then some people spoke Russian, and then some people did sign language, I would be kind of drawn out of it.
I think so. It would be a distanciation, right? It would be almost Brechtian.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it draws attention to the artificiality of the performance if you'd have the subtitles.
But this is a repeated thing when we're watching this movie.
Which is maybe something to think about, that is Drive My Car then also particularly a self-conscious example of what might be called world cinema or global transnational cinema, in the sense that it was a film festival film. It is, to some degree, as much intended for an international audience as it is a domestic Japanese audience.
100%.
Which is different from a lot of, you can get crossover type films, but this is a film that is really it's something, I often wrote about, is there are artists who are make popular cinema in their own nation. There are artists who make art films for their own, language and culture. And then there are people who their bread and butter is the global film festival circuit and international critics and audiences and things like that.
And so how do you see this film? Sorry.
I think this is more one of those designed for the international art film festival circuit in a lot of ways. And I don't mean that in a denigration. I think that means that it's already playing with those expectations around language, and that not everybody's going to be a native understander of the culture and things like that.
I believe that the short story, the theater festival he's directing at, is in Busan, so in actually South Korea. And then I think because of COVID restrictions when they were shooting this, they couldn't leave the country, so they changed it to Hiroshima. But then that raises the question for me of does that setting have any significance? Mm-hmm. When we have a tale of sort of characters with sort of, they're dealing with, the two main characters are dealing with some past trauma. I'm wondering what significant, it has to have some significance in it. Can I say that? Or
I would say that the significance is the French New Wave film Hiroshima Mon Amour, which is about two people who meet.
Explain that a little bit.
So the film Hiroshima Mon Amour is a Alain Resnais film from, I want to say 59, but I didn't look that up.
It's one of those early art house French hits.
But Left Bank, Alain Resnais, I think it was his first film after Night and Fog. like his first feature. But it like always deals with the trauma of the dropping a nuclear bomb, and it is about a relationship, temporary fling affair between a Japanese man and a French journalist, or I think she is. If I recall, it's been about a few years since I watched it, but and they have their relationship while she's covering this opening of the atomic bomb memorial and stuff like that, and she reveals then to him over the course of this brief encounter her traumatic story from World War II in France. Have you seen the film?
I have, but it's been years.
Yeah.
Now you're sort of reminding me of it.
So there's this revelation of the past to a stranger in this confined period of time. In this case, it's the romantic fling with a person in another country. It brings up the trauma, in this case, of war and all that.
I'm also now thinking the very beginning of the film, where it's like, right, they're both like Odo and him are in bed. They're both like nude, but you see like these silhouetted figures in the dark. That even to me kind of recalls that.
Yes, totally.
Hiroshima
The opening
Mon
scenes
Amour,
of that
right?
film
Like,
have the intercutting of like
in
the
the
bomb
talking
stuff with the conversation while they're having
Yeah,
sex.
like lovers talking in bed in the sort of silhouettes of their bodies. Yeah, okay. So I think the connection.
I think there's definitely a intentional reference.
Yeah, I think it's also. So I think I'm the only one of us who's actually been to Hiroshima.
Yeah, I haven't.
It's an interesting space because it's impossible to walk around that city without being aware of the fact that it was obliterated, and it's like one of two cities to actually experience this hellfire of beyond anything that anybody can ever imagine. And so it's like a beautiful city that's near the water, and it's lots of park space, and it's very spread out and very in touch with like the bay and the hillside around it. And you go 20 minutes south and you get to Miyajima and the Itsukushima shrine, the famous torii that gets the tidal waves come in halfway through and fill it up. And so it's this kind of film setting that it comes automatically with the implication of things that linger and haunt, and you can never escape that. And because the Japanese people are extremely reticent and extremely emotionally reserved, I think it's a nation that's still kind of dealing with that, to use the word trauma, of being the nation that was bombed, where it's like, how do you go about your day in Hiroshima and actually engage with the mystery of what that means and the pain of what that means, living in a place that is born out of literal ashes of hell? The other thing, and it's the really simplistic story comment, but it's basically, there's very few cities in Japan that would accommodate the idea of driving to work.
Because they're not spread out enough.
Well, no, they're spread out, but like it wouldn't be the same drive if he was driving from outside of Tokyo from a suburb into Tokyo,
No,
because it'd be through the city.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's along the coastline is completely different feeling, and it's one of the few cities that allows it while still being large enough to justify the idea of a festival and the other stuff. So it works on multiple levels, but I think it is, even if it really does work on that level of there is this whole backstory that's just implicated through the very setting itself, and then you also get that kind of stuff with Misaki's story about her her family home getting buried up in Hokkaido on the snowstorm and the ruin of it.
Yeah, and they go contemplate it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's this idea of like, well, actually, things don't just get paved over. Things don't just get rebuilt. You always will have a kind of monument to the past pain that you can engage with and you can confront, but you can never actually just ignore.
And you might not be able to solve. And that also links the connection with his relationship with Otto, which he can never then solve.
Yeah.
Because, right?
You can make peace with it, but yeah, it's not something to be conquered.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really rewarding film, and one of the things I get, one of my final statements on it would be theatrical plays, or even watching a performance. I think great works of art in that kind of late 19th century, early 20th century mode, structurally and thematically, they're very much about telling you how to engage with the art as you watch it. And this film is like about like that too, where it tells you to slow down, to pay attention, to watch, to be quiet. It does that with the prologue, the 45 minutes. It tells you you're going to have to wait for things to clarify. But then it also does it with the characters to each other in his rehearsal mode, the fact that he takes these drives every day, the fact that it's a film, it's like, just wait for it, it's going to reveal itself to you, just wait for it. You have to engage with it, surrender to it, be patient to it, open yourself up to it, and you're going to get something back. And it's almost like an implicit promise with the play, right? Like the plays do this. It's like, and Shakespeare always put this in. He would literally have a chorus member say like, you get Puck in Midsummer Night's Dream be like, giving you an invitation to this show, and then it's going to pay off in the end. Like just explicitly, but he's not doing that so explicitly because these are based off of later theatrical performances, but it's in there. It's this idea that the engagement with art, you are part of this actual story, and we are going to tell you how to engage with it, and we are promising you that you will come to some realization at the end of it, which will earn your attention and your patience.
Yeah, and I think that's a good summary of sort of, if you haven't seen it yet, just the importance, I'd say, of like, it's the kind of movie I think if you like really try and just go in open and let it let the movie take its effect. If you're going in with sort of a very strict expectation, it might not work the same way. Drive My Car is currently playing in limited release in theaters and will be streaming in March. I can't help but compare Drive My Car to Parasite, even if they're very different films. Both have been pretty big successes in North America and earned the Best Picture nomination at the Oscars, although Parasite was much more of a commercial hit domestically. But, COVID and theaters might be a factor there as well. Even if they are very dissimilar films, do you guys see a pattern in Hollywood's engagement with these kinds of films? Do you think there's any connections between, the Parasite Best Picture nod and this?
Well, I think it's... So I remember, during the whole Oscars So White thing, they'd opened up a lot to a different demographics in the Oscar membership. And Parasite is the film that kind of paid off that reopening. Like, the fact that they had a lot more international members.
Yeah.
The fact that they didn't just have this kind of actor-producer monopoly on the actual whole industry. And so you're starting to have this understanding that, Parasite kind of paid off. If a really good movie comes into theaters in North America, average people actually are going to go see it and think it's really, really good, even if they might be, being told about the movie in like a vacuum might think it's like sounds really artsy or not their thing. And I think Drive My Car, even though it is probably more of an art house film than Parasite, it fits in a similar mode, and the fact that it's nominated for the Oscars definitely proves that within the industry, this North American bubble is really shrinking.
Yeah.
Or has been popped.
Yeah. I think that, likewise, what you said, that films like Parasite showed that it's not actually just the demographic change in the Academy, but there is an interest in films from East Asia, especially right now, that's coming back, and because I think that, like, I know that Parasite was definitely one of the most talked about films for the last 2 years, maybe because it was one of the last big films before COVID hit, but like a lot of lots of people who aren't like foreign film buffs watched it and liked it a lot. Like it's one of those like now almost weirdly a pop cultural touch point you can talk about, like,
you can just say Parasite and people in pop culture people
and
sort
this
of know
film
what that
again,
means.
it's not quite,
Squid Game operates similarly.
Exactly. This is not quite the same kind of thing, but at least among it has at least spread out from just like the hardcore cinephiles to the what I call the Oscar retiree crowd. I know that they're like the people in Waterloo who maybe in Toronto attend like TIFF or the Princess Cinemas and places like that. Are all talking about how they went to see this. Right.
It's going back to that kind of 60s, 70s when the European art house, that, the Ingmar Bergman film, that was the perfect example back then where, yeah, maybe not like average Joe goes to see it, but the person who likes to think they're somewhat cultured is
Retired
like
university
seek it out.
professors who maybe aren't cinephiles.
Yeah, and I think, I guess the last thing I'd just say about that, I also think it shows that the international festival circuit is now going to it's going to be sort of a big player in not just sort of the best foreign film category at the Oscars, but will be going, continuing on from this point in the actual best picture category. And there's always been a couple, right, in the past we can point to.
It's very rare,
but
right?
it's very, very rare.
Parasite was only the third film to win both
Yeah.
the Cannes Film Festival and Best Picture.
But I think it's more. I think it's going to be a thing, and I also think if you're savvy about how they market it and bring it in to sort of like draw into that particular audience in North America, I think there's a lot of potential there, and I think it's actually just a good thing for like film going in North America. Likewise, while we're talking about foreign films, have you guys seen anything that you'd recommend? Anything that you think is a must see? And by foreign films, I mean non-English language, non-North American productions, as we're discussing International Arthouse in early 2022.
I watched Asghar Farhadi's A Hero. It's streaming on Amazon right now. And
Farhadi, that's he did a Separation.
So Farhadi
right?
did A Separation. It's probably his biggest, I wouldn't say hit, but like critical hit.
Yeah, it was a beloved critically.
Yeah, and this film is a return to him working back in his native Iran after his last couple. He had a couple films in the last decade overseas in France and Europe and places. But this one, it also I really liked it. It's a few things I'll say about this film. It's actually, I would describe it as like a moral parable. It's not like a morality tale or a lesson film, but there's aspects of parable to it in the sense that characters do things and make bad decisions, but you can read it from multiple angles, and it's quite rich. Like Drive My Car, it's a film that assumes that we're going to be invested in the goings-ons of regular people. In this case, in a culture and country that's maybe less familiar to us, but it also shows how you can a different language, and maybe they don't have the trappings of like suburban consumer culture in North America, but they're still like modern people with their own problems and issues, but they sort it through their Iranian culture and religion and ritual and things like that. The film opens with a very long wordless sequence where the main character, Rahim, is released from prison. So he's been in prison for a debtor's prison, essentially, because he owes 150 million tomans, which I guess is the currency in Iran, to his ex-brother-in-law. And he has a couple days to settle it. And basically what happens in the film, the basic premise is all I'll tell you, is that Rahim's girlfriend, who he plans on marrying once he's released, has found like a bag, a woman's bag with some gold coins in it, and they're going to sell the gold and pay back his brother-in-law. Yeah. But it turns out that they don't end up selling the coins, in part because the price of gold drops, which wouldn't have covered the amount that they need. So they pause, and then they end up returning the bag to the woman who it belonged to. And then when Rahim returns back to prison after the 2 days, the people in the prison, like the warden and people, discover it, and they make it into like this sort of like local like feel good news story, like kind of, and it gets praised in the media, and he kind of becomes a local celebrity like for his like good deed. And they have like there's like a foundation that comes together and they're like applauding him for it. But it turns out it's like. But his brother-in-law is still really like bitter. Ex-brother-in-law is really bitter about it. He thinks that Rahim's a bad guy. He's going to ruin his sister's new marriage to another guy, and then he has this son who has a speech impediment, and so it's a very touching film. Farhadi, his films remind me of like if you made someone like the Dardenne brothers a little more like accessible and like warm and sentimental in that sense. Melodramatic, yeah. But this film's not like overly melodramatic, but it does expect. We talked about like having patience. Like the opening scene, he gets out of prison and then he walks to meet his other brother-in-law, his sister's husband, who he's going to be staying with, and he has to climb up these huge scaffolding stairs because they're actually restoring these ancient like tombs, like Persian, like 2,500-year-old tombs working on them, and they talk a little bit about like the history of Persia and around there, which is kind of neat. And then they go off in their car to like the modern day, and they're like, so it's a cool portrait of like just regular people in Iran. There's not a particular emphasis on like religion or politics or things like that, but more just everyday life, even though it's inflected through the culture and those kind of aspects, which I really like. So it's very unpretentious, although weirdly, because the main character Rahim, he occasionally like lashes out at people, and he has a short temper, and he's obviously made some bad decisions and getting into deep debt. There are moments that I'll make a really weird comparison, and not that this movie is nearly as like heart attack inducing, but there are moments, the intertwining of money and family and debt and stuff like that reminded me of Uncut Gems. In that like, Rahim's almost
in a short window of time.
In a short window of time, right?
right?
Like a few days,
Yeah.
like, and it's like you're like, don't do that, or like if people discover this thing, and then the things like keep falling into place. But obviously, it's not as intense, and it's a little.
That sounds good though. I want to check that out.
But no, it's a great film. Definitely check it out. There's some great performances in it. I really enjoyed the ex-brother-in-law. The actor is Mohsen Tanabanda. And he, I think it was another critic who said his performance when everyone's praising Rahim for giving the money back, and he's sitting there with his arms crossed so tightly that a crowbar couldn't open them, and he's just so angry. But like, he's like, this guy's a loser. He totally didn't do this. It's like, it's very good.
چقدر لاغر شدی این دفعه.
والا من هر دفعه هم دهم.
فکر نمی‌کردم اینقدر بی‌طاقتت بشم.
دلم برات تنگ شده.
بفرم.
باشه. احیانا کسی نمیاد اینجا یه کیف گم کرده باشه.
نه چطور؟
ما یه مقدار طلا پیدا کردیم.
Aren, what about you?
So I saw The Worst Person in the World last weekend. I thought it was amazing. I probably even liked it more than Drive My Car, possibly because it speaks so particularly to people my age. Like, it's about this 30-year-old woman, just like, mid-20s up to late 20s. It follows her through kind of 12 chapters in her life. It has this really literary conceit where there's a narrator. You don't know who the narrator is, but it's kind of explore her romantic relationships, her lack of direction in life. That's the kind of key motivator. She's a person who's in med school, and as we learn in the prologue, she's in med school, and then she's in, I'm actually about the emotions, the people, life of the mind, so I'm actually into psychology, but no, I'm actually into art. I need to do photography, and she works in a bookstore, and then she kind of, she's a person who latches onto things and is so, she's flighty, right? Like, and we all know people like this, and so this familiarity is part of the power of the movie. It's extremely credible. But unlike, I think, so many movies that attempt to capture some kind of authenticity, it's never boring. It's never mundane in like a filmmaking sense. It is perceptive to a degree that is almost like alarming when you watch it. It reminded me of the Linklater's Before trilogy, where there's moments where the characters say things to each other, and you're like, you just kind of rub your head and you're like, oh boy, like, did you just like rip something? Because I think that's what when we talked about this in our reviews, and we talked about this on the podcast a lot, where it's like, you get to the universal through the specific, right? You dig down. And so by being so true to that type of individual in the situations she has in kind of modern Oslo, and the romantic relationships and her various fixations and narcissism, frankly, you get to this extreme degree of honesty that is like startling for people watching it. And so I think some people can take it a little too far in reading the film as some kind of apology for a person who is very frustrating, when in actuality it's just a great drama with a lot of comedic and romantic elements. And I think it does what great art should do, in that it incredibly portrays a human life in all of its complexities, and in a way that speaks to the person who is watching it in a way that's really electric. Like, I don't want to spoil things or anything. I think people should definitely check this out if they have any interest in European art cinema, or even just kind of romantic dramas about people coming of age, because it hits both those things really well. Mm-hmm. But there's this one scene about 30 minutes into the movie, and it's called Chapter 2, Cheating. And the whole thing is that she's in this long-term relationship with this cartoonist, and she doesn't really like the event she's at with him, so she decides, I'm going to go home early. But then she's wearing this kind of really fancy cocktail dress, and she's looking really good, and she walks a few blocks, because Oslo is a city where everybody walks everywhere. It's very walkable. It's all about parks and stuff. And she walks down the street, and she sees this mansion with a big party going on. She's like, okay, I'm just, I don't really want to go home, so I'm just going to come into there. And she wanders into the party and ends up having kind of a flirtation with this guy that she's instantly attracted to. And they both start talking and drinking and spending time, and the question comes up. It's like, are you with someone? Yes, I'm with someone. And he's with someone. And so they say, okay, are we cheating right now? And they're like, well, no, but what does cheating mean? And they start negotiating this aspect of like, well, cheating, it's not cheating if we don't actually kiss, but if I touch you here, is that cheating? And it's like, well, no. And so they keep pushing these boundaries, and it becomes this little dance almost between these characters for about 5 to 10 minutes, and it's so it gets that kind of electricity of pushing up against boundaries, and then like what transgressing what is and is not transgressive. And I think that speaks so much to a person at that time in life, where you're kind of finding out what is and is not exciting to you, what is and is not morally acceptable, and all these things. And so it's kind of a scene that captures the appeal of the movie as a whole. So it's a strong rave from me, a rare scenario where I go into a movie and just kind of love everything about it.
You've seen other films by Trier, right?
Yeah, I've seen other Joachim Trier movies. Yeah, I've seen August Oslo 31st, which is probably the movie the most directly connected to it. It has, both of these movies have the actor Anders Danielsen Lai, who he's the cartoonist boyfriend of this one. He's the main character in that one. They're very much, I wouldn't say like loose, free-flowing movies or anything, but they're very much ruminations on like what is meaningful, what's not, what are you left with in life when you, like, the decisions you make, and how each turn, life is a street, and each time you turn on it, you're not turning another way, and so that cuts off possibilities and aspects, and what is kind of the consequences of the decisions you make.
Let's go party.
OK?
Okej.
Ha det.
Ha det. Vi var ikke utro, da.
Vi var ikke det.
Vi var ikke det.
Nei.
A Hero is currently streaming on Amazon Prime, while The Worst Person in the World is playing in limited release in theaters. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, subscribe, share with your friends, and we'll catch you next time.
Goodbye, Mr. Bond.
I bid you farewell.